Welcome, everyone. My name is Rebecca Trout, and I am the Program Director of the All-America City Awards here at the National Civic League. For those of you not familiar with the League, we are a 125-year-old nonprofit, and we really aim to advance civic engagement to make our communities more equitable and thriving. The All-America City Award is our flagship program. It began in 1949 to really recognize outstanding examples of civic engagement and local problem solving. So every year we recognize 10 communities through our award, and then we really use this webinar series to highlight those community stories and or to share programs and resources that might help communities with their engagement work. Just very briefly, a little bit about this year's award. We are so happy to be able to be co-hosting it this year with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And as such, the theme for this year is Housing as a Platform for Early School Success and Equitable Learning Recovery. You can learn all about the award on our website. We also had an informational webinar back in November that really recommend you reviewing. We shared tips for applying and types of projects that you could include in that application. And then for those of you who are interested in applying, we have our letter of intent coming up due on January 10th. Really encourage you to get that in. It saves you some money on your application fee and helps us to kind of give you extra support as you work on that application. But enough about AAC for today. We are happy and thrilled to be able to be focusing on creating more age-friendly communities today. And we are joined by three excellent speakers. First up, we'll hear from Bob Murphy, who's the Colorado State Director of AARP. And then Janine Vanderberg, who is the Director of Changing the Narrative. And last but not least, we'll be joined by Dottie Wicks, who is the Chair of the Elderly Affairs Committee and one of our All-America City finalists, Miami Lake, Florida. But before I hand it over to them, I want to introduce my colleague, Kiva Hummel. She is the Program Director of Civic Engagement here at the National Civic League, and she's going to share a little bit of exciting news about some of the work, the League's aging work. Kiva?
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's wonderful to be here, everyone. I'll just say a few words because we have, as Rebecca has mentioned, a fantastic lineup for you this morning. But thank you to the Next 50 Initiative. We're going to be continuing work that we've started over this year and into the next year, where we're working with 4 communities here in Colorado to add an intersectional equity lens to their aging work. And in particular, to provide a tailored civic assistance program engaging with all people in the community over the next year to increase inclusive engagement with older adults in each of these 4 regions. And I would like to also include a huge shout out to our partners and those who have provided a lot of guidance in developing this program and helping to support it along the way. That does include Colorado AARP, Denver Regional Council of Governments, Colorado Municipal League, and then the Governor's Office on Aging. So thank you all so much to our partners. And I'd like to pass it back off to Rebecca so we can hear more from our speakers.
Thank you so much, Kiva. And before we do hear from our speakers, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we have everyone muted and we ask that you remain that way just to cut down on any background noise. We'll ask you to hold your questions until the very end, and you can put those in the chat if you want as they come to you, or we'll use the raise hand and chat feature at the very end to be able to answer any questions. We are recording today, and the slides, as well as that recording and any additional resources that are mentioned by our speakers, will be emailed to you under the email address that you registered with. So be on the lookout for that if you have any colleagues who might be interested, or if you just want to revisit any of the content. And with that, I'm excited to hand it off to Bob. Bob, have you start sharing your screen.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let's see if we can pull this off. And while I do that, I'm going to kill just a few seconds by putting in a little plug for the All-America City Awards. I had the privilege of being mayor of a city in 2011 when we won the first All-America City Award in the history of that city. That was Lakewood, Colorado. And I can tell you it was a great source of civic pride for from then until today to have won that award. And actually they've won it twice now. Okay, do a foundational set on what age-friendly communities are all about. We define an age-friendly community as one that is safe and secure, has affordable and appropriate housing and transportation options, has supportive community features and services. And once these are in place, those resources enhance personal independence, allow residents to age in place, and foster residents' engagement in the community's civic, economic, and social life. So the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities, and of course we got to have an acronym, there it is. And we began in 2012 with this effort. We now have 584 members of the network, and that includes 7 states and 577 communities. We have actually 20 here in Colorado. This map shows 19. And we have been deep into this work since about 2016, which is when I arrived at AARP. And obviously with my background, I do have very much an interest in local communities. What we do with the network is we provide a foundation for communities to set their own path, to plan their own future. We call that foundation the 8 domains of livability. And you can see them there: outdoor spaces, transportation, housing, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, communication and information, and community and health services. This is a very flexible framework. A community can choose 3 of these, 5 of these. They can add things to them. We've seen communities do, mental health or environmental resources or whatever the community, the leadership, and the community leaders want to do. They set their own paths. So, and along with the Age-Friendly Community Network, we have an entity here in Colorado called Lifelong Colorado. That is the state livability age-friendly effort. When Governor and now U.S. Senator Hickenlooper declared Colorado to be an age-friendly state in 2018, he said that he believed that a Colorado well adapted for aging is one where all individuals can thrive, a Colorado for all. And the vision of an age-friendly Colorado was very simply one that was made up of as many age-friendly communities as possible and supported by the state government. So it is very much a bottom-up, grassroots kind of approach. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we in communities have done during the pandemic. And I'm going to go quickly through these and then give a quick example of just one community, one of our 20. The first thing we did in 2020, after a lot of state and national webinars about the virus, about how to stop, how to keep from getting sick, et cetera, we conducted 5 age-friendly community scans, 5 different webinars in which our age-friendly partners joined and talked to each other about what was happening in their community, what they were doing to help protect their residents, and as we know, in many cases, unfortunately, to help feed and house their residents. We heard from, we have 2 communities in the network who actually have a public health model for their age-friendly work. So they were listened to very carefully, as you can imagine. Lots of shared best practices during those meetings. And obviously with AARP, we spent a lot of time and continue to spend time with our age-friendly communities and with the entire state and our membership, which is nearly 700,000, talking about the virus, talking about vaccines. And you can see by the bilingual nature of this slide, we spend a ton of time on outreach to our Hispanic Latino community, which is about 22% of the state's population. And in many of the rural areas of Colorado, that percentage of the population is actually much higher. One of the things that we did that we're really very proud of is we produced 2 shows for public television, PBS 12 here in Denver. This was the second. Roberto Ray, who is our Director of Multicultural Outreach and Livable Communities, and Angela Cortez, our Director of Communications, created these programs. This is the second one. It was called Hispanic Community Voices, and it was a very stark depiction of the impact of COVID-19 on communities of color, in this case, Hispanic community in Northeast Colorado, which for those of you that are not from around here, it's the center of our very large meatpacking industry and also an agricultural center. And they were hit especially hard. We did another one on the disparate impact of the COVID-19 virus on the Hispanic Latino community throughout the state. So we did two statewide television productions just to help people understand the disparate nature of this unfortunate pandemic. And there's Roberto. It's probably the only time I've seen Roberto in a suit, for those of you who know him, but he is bilingual. He has been our spokesperson on Spanish language radio, Telemundo. And in this case, one of the latest things we did was to get information out about some of the government assistance program, in this case, the rental assistance. We found in early November of this year that a very, very small percentage of funds were actually had been doled out by local communities. So we did an entire public relations effort to get the word out to people that how to and where to apply for these funds for rental assistance. Obviously, the workforce development is very important. Workforce for older adults. We have many, many webinars on that. And that includes working virtually and how to become skilled at using your digital devices. Combating social isolation. We all know what effects this pandemic has had on unfortunately aggravating that situation. We had to go from doing 200 in-person programs a year to doing 0 and transitioning to virtual programming. We've done about 350 of those. And as we started out, again, they were informational, how to deal with your physical health, how to deal with your mental health, you name it. But we gradually over time, and particularly getting to 2021, we transitioned into what we call fun with purpose programming. We found that our members and older adults really like this. Many are still not comfortable going out to classes and that sort of thing. So, I mean, we did virtual history tours of the state of Colorado, art classes, cooking classes, wine walks. And I chose this one because it caught us all by surprise. Tips on baking at high altitude. We held it on a Monday morning in October and had 900 people show up. And it is still our most requested one to view an archived video. Who knew, right? Our community, we have a program called AARP Community Challenge Grants, which are quick action grants. We've given out about $9 million over the last 4 years in these grants. So new in 2020 and again in 2021, a coronavirus subcategory was added so that towns and cities could apply for a grant based on their needs in terms of coronavirus recovery. So on concluding with just one small example of what one community is doing, again, we have 20, not excluding any of those, but Carbondale is interesting because they're very small, number one, less than 10,000 people, and number two, because they work very closely in partnership with two neighboring age-friendly communities, Pitkin County, where Aspen is, for those of you that aren't from here, and Eagle County, where Vail is. They're all in kind of the same geographic area and have a collaborative working on their age-friendly efforts. So these are some of the programs that this small town of Carbondale has to help their older adults thrive, and in some cases, frankly, survive. Again, when we're talking about food insecurity and housing challenges. They spend a lot of time on trying to prevent the spread of infection. A high Hispanic Latino population, they did everything bilingually. Here is something they did to encourage mask wearing. And then they had a really interesting program called Shot Whisperers, in which residents could find out where and how to get their vaccines, which again is not always easy in a rural, rugged, mountainous terrain. So in conclusion, as this slide says, 1 in 3 Americans is age 50 or older. Is your community are you going to be a great community for people of all ages? So we're here to help with that. Locally, our Denver Regional Council of Governments has a Boomer Bond program that does a lot of very similar things. And with that, I will wrap up and stop sharing and look forward to questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Bob. I really could have used that baking class when I was living in Denver. Understand why that was so popular. And now I'm really excited to introduce Janine, who is going to be talking to us a little bit about how to combat ageism rather, and her program, Changing the Narrative. Janine?
So I want to chat with you about our initiative, which is called Changing the Narrative. And literally what narrative means is the story that we tell ourselves, that people tell each other, that communities tell each other about what aging is like, what older people are like. And so our goal in this initiative, which is funded by a Next 50 initiative and Rose Community Foundation, as well as really communities around the country that hire us to come in and do workshops and technical assistance. And what we're trying to do is change the way that people think, talk, and act about aging and about ageism. Our goal is big. We want to end ageism. And we think this is important because demographic change. I want, each of you to think about how your own community, and Bob just, pointed out the number of people and the percentage of people age 50 and over around the country. Well, this is true in every community around the country. The US Census Bureau did a really interesting graphic a little over a year ago that showed the change in the population pyramid of the United States. So it used to be literally a pyramid, a whole lot of younger people tapering up to a small number of older people. And now it looks like this, it's column shaped. And we actually think at Changing the Narrative that that's an opportunity for communities, right? How do we tap into the resilience, the strengths, the insights that older people can bring to our communities, to our younger people in our community, to our workforce, if we don't allow and it's not advancing. Okay, here we go. So I think it's important to start with a definition of ageism. And ageism is essentially, it's prejudice, it's stereotyping, or it's outright discrimination against someone based on age. It can be directed against younger people. So if someone is running around saying things like entitled millennials, or they don't have enough experience yet, that's ageism. But for the purposes of this, we're going to talk about ageism directed against older people. And we know that it's really prevalent. So these stats, all from the last couple of years, University of Michigan, a national poll of people aged 50 and over, 82% experienced one or more forms of ageism in their everyday lives. The Aarp study last year that was released to me was really, really interesting. 78% of people age 45 and over had experienced or witnessed age discrimination in the workplace. And to the question, Rebecca, that I think you had queued up to me before, how has COVID changed things? That 78% was up from 61% in 2018, right? We also know another study by the Urban Institute, large national sample, over 20,000 people, that 56% of people across the US who entered their 50s with stable employment have been pushed out or laid off. So if we want age-friendly communities, it's incumbent on all of us to address things like workplace age discrimination and make sure that older people have opportunities. So I am going to talk a little bit about COVID. I think a question National Civic League posed to me was, has COVID increased ageism? I don't know. There's some debate among anti-ageism activists. Did it increase or did it simply expose ageism around the world? But when you think about first, it wasn't taken seriously, right? Old person's disease. There were all those hashtag horrors like boomer remover. The claim that older people should sacrifice themselves for the economy seemed outrageous when it was first put forward by an elected official, and then it found its way into economic journals, right? We know that there were policy decisions that were made by well-meaning people, but had the effect of increasing social isolation of older adults. We know across the country still there are crisis standards of care that would be used in case of triage that have the effect of moving older people, and especially older people of color who are more likely to have comorbidities, to the back of triage lines. And we know in the workforce for the first time that older people were disproportionately pushed out or laid off. And there's this mythology out there that we kind of all retired and decided to spend time with grandchildren, go on cruise ships. And I will say, from the people that I talk to every single day, there are people who want to work. They embrace programs like Aarp is doing, and we have to do something something as communities, though, to make sure that people who want and need to work have that opportunity. So our approach at changing the narrative, and I'll share the kind of things that we do, which are all based on research-based practices and effective practices to end ageism. And so our approach is very consistent, right, with the basic principle of the National Civic League of civic engagement. We believe we are the leaders that we've been waiting for. Somebody else isn't coming to save us. And we certainly saw that during the pandemic, where some colleagues of mine said, you know, the anti-ageist movement has, and the positive aging movement has been set back 20 years because every time we had a well-meaning elected official, public health official, standing up every day at press conferences saying weak, vulnerable, elderly, it was the opposite, right, of that image that we know older people can and must be for our communities. So one of our strategies is we do a reframing aging. So there's a national reframing aging. It is teaching people evidence-based language that makes people more likely to support public policies like age-friendly communities. It's based on research by the Frameworks Institute. So changing the narrative, we do workshops like this, obviously in the last 2 years, mostly virtually, although we've just started doing them in person again. And we provide workshops and technical assistance for communities, elected officials, media, et cetera. And so far, I think we have trained people in 43 states and about 3 or 4 countries outside of the United States in reframing aging. We do a lot of community education and organizing. We do presentations, think of them as consciousness raising groups for older people about ageism and what it is and how we internalize it ourselves. We bring in speakers like author Elizabeth White of 55, Unemployed and Faking Normal, to help people recognize that age discrimination is a thing. It is real. It is experienced by a whole lot of people, and we encourage people to talk about it and then try to do something about it. And then finally, we train others, and this is kind of, I call this a combination. It's the way that we can have reach and impact, and it also reduces social isolation. So we are training older people to train others and to become advocates, to do things like become social media ambassadors, write letters to the editor, and do workshops on ageism. We do a lot of storytelling to challenge the concept. And what we do is we tell and elevate both on our own blog and social media and in newsletters. We tell the story of everyday older adults who are doing amazing things in the community, not because they're superheroes, but this is because what we do as we get older, we can use our insight and experience. And so I've got a link, and anytime when you get this presentation, anytime you see blue wording, you can click, and that's a live link to the source underneath. We do intergenerational connection. So one of the things research shows is that when you put generations together, right, and you connect them, that it actually has a powerful impact on reducing ageism against younger people. So we have this series called On the Same Page. You can go to our website, you can download a toolkit and facilitate a conversation like this in your community. During the pandemic, we both moved these conversations virtually, but we also partnered with PBS 12, our local PBS station, and did a series of intergenerational conversations so that we could reach people who didn't have access to technology. We do a lot of policy research and advocacy, and we didn't start out wanting to do this, but the first year, 2018 of Changing the Narrative, I did 42 workshops in person across Colorado, and we were in Colorado only then. And at every single workshop, people stood up and they said, that ageism thing you're talking about, it happened to me, it happened to my dad, it happened to my partner. And so we realized, unfortunately, I was able to go back to our funders and say, you know, we just can't talk about ageism exists. We need to do something about it. So we've done analysis. We've seen what other, states, other communities have done. And so thrilled to be partnering, with groups, including Aarp Colorado, on strengthening age discrimination laws, on doing things like promoting legislation that would remove high school graduation dates from job applications. So I don't know if anyone else finds it bizarre that it's illegal to ask someone their age, but it's not illegal to ask someone their high school graduation date, right? Because of the number of older people that we've heard about workforce issues, We started presenting the business case for older workers in intergenerational teams to chambers of commerce, to HR groups, and there's a really strong business case. We train workforce development centers. So one of the things we recognized during the pandemic, especially as older people were being pushed out, that workforce development centers had lots of older people age 50 and over coming to them, but they didn't necessarily know how to work with a population, that had a lot of skills, that had worked for a long time. And so fortunately, there are programs like AARPs, and we've also trained workforce development staff on how to position older workers to employers. We've partnered with the National Age-Friendly Institute to certify employers as being age-friendly. And then finally, we also engage in advocacy about removing age identifiers from job applications. This past year, we launched our age-friendly healthcare campaign. We produced a film with one of our area agencies on aging. It's a really short film. At the link, you can kind of download it, but it's a way to start talking about how ageism shows up in healthcare. I had one of those experiences when I went in for cataract surgery this summer, and the doctors asked me, well, why do you want to see? And I'm thinking, why would anybody want to see? And then I looked at the choices on the form, and the choices were like shopping, playing golf. And I was, crossed them all off. And I said, no, I work, I do presentations, I facilitate workshops. And it was just, and they had no idea. They hadn't thought about that maybe someone over age 65 might actually, quote, still be working. And we do presentations and workshops on how ageism shows up in healthcare and what we can do about it. And again, we engage in advocacy. One of the advocacy efforts that we're involved in now is to remove age and comorbidity criteria from crisis standards of care. And finally, we do kind of what we call kind of fun public awareness campaign. So we know that there is always a group, and that's a really small group. So we need to let people know in more interesting ways. So for example, we know visual ageism, a lot of the images of older people reinforce all of the negative stereotypes that everything is in decline. So we did a real photo contest, and we solicited photos of adults age 50 and over who were engaged in volunteerism in their communities, starting businesses, working, all the things. This last year, we did an anti-ageist birthday card campaign. So if any of you have shopped birthday cards, there are all of those really awful cards that show people, everything is sagging, everything's downhill, everybody's grumpy, everybody's complaining. So we produced a series we commissioned Colorado artists to create. And then we've done kind of a lot of promotion about that. And I actually had the opportunity to speak at the National Greeting Card Association about why ageism in birthday cards. So birthday cards are such a tangible indicator, right, of our marking passage of time. So it was a great way to talk about what we can do. And then finally, we, from time to time, coordinate social media campaigns of getting a large number of people to agree to share information on social media about a common topic. So I think my final question is somebody, I think Rebecca said, can you talk about how we can apply an age lens to our policies, our programs, our work? And I would go back and I would start with the definition of ageism. When you're looking at anything that you're trying to do, does it reflect maybe stereotypes about older adults? Does it actually discriminate against older adults? And let me end with 3 examples. If you have diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in your community, in your workplace, does it include age? Are you okay with the fact that probably in most communities, the laws that protect people against workplace discrimination are less serious and carry smaller penalties than do laws against other forms of discrimination? So you want to look at a lens like that. We know in many communities, federal stimulus dollars were coming in for training programs, right, to reskill and upskill people. Were assumptions made that that should only go to younger people, and we're not going to invest in older people because, well, they won't stay that long, or all of those other stereotypes, which are actually factually true. So that's a way of looking at it. And then I know it may seem tedious and somewhat depressing, but look at the crisis standards of care in your state, in your community. Do they have the effect of moving older people to the back of the triage line? So I think the biggest thing to me in applying an age lens, look at the definition of ageism. Look at, does it reflect stereotypes that you might have or someone else might have about what older people can are capable of doing. And if it does, just don't do it. Just say no. Here's how you can get in touch with us. All of those live links are ways that you can get in touch with me. And I look forward to any questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Janine. That was, at least personally, very eye-opening. I love the greeting card idea. That's just fantastic. And now I want to invite Dottie from Miami Lakes to talk about some of her work on the community level and how Miami Lakes is engaging older adults in their community. Dottie?
Good afternoon. I've been on the committee since 2008, and we've had numerous programs such as parties for Christmas and all the holidays. We had trips, field trips. We had, and this year we're going to try to get back with our health fair. And the biggest one we had that people really loved was the bingo. So we started the bingo. When the crisis came, the COVID came, we decided we had to do something because the seniors, we could see them sitting at home, nobody's contacting them, and they needed some help. So we started something called as a traveling bingo. We engaged all the restaurants in town. We were helping them as well as helping our seniors. And what they would do is we would get, some could come and pick up the meal, and some were homebound. The homebound were given their meals by, we have a little bus that goes around the town called the Freebie. And if the senior needs to go any place in the town, they can call it, it comes and takes them and then picks them up afterwards. So in each lunch, there was a bingo card, and the bingo card would either say sorry or winner. And with that, they would have like a $25 gift certificate from the restaurant we were using. And this has been a huge success for us. When we were doing the regular bingos in the town, we had about 80 people participating. Right now we have 159. So then I had a few of the seniors that wanted to help. They said, why can't we help you? And I said, well, you can. The thing is, one lady has 10 people in her area that we would be servicing, but they couldn't get out. So she started calling them, telling them when it was coming, bringing the lunch to them. And they've engaged a relationship where if they have a problem, they call her and then she calls me. So we've got like 3 or 4 people that are doing that for us, which I think is good because in just talking with seniors, the biggest comment I get is it's nice to know we have somebody our age being there for us and keeping us a part of the town. And just having somebody to talk to. I don't know how many times a week I get seniors that want to just talk and say, what's going on? How are things? And I think that for me, they've kept me solid, knowing what to do, when to do, and how to do it. Because being busy and helping them helped me. And we've got a few more programs we're going to be looking at for the coming year. And I'm looking forward to it. It's we're going to get back with our regular bingo in January, which I'm not too sure I'm fond of, but we're going to try it once. We're going to try our field trips. We've been all over the state with those field trips, and we have a group. There's a gentleman on our committee that has 95 and above, and they're called the old geezers, and they play baseball, and they have played baseball through the whole COVID.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You hit on a couple of things that are important. The social isolation that so many people have been facing in the last few years, as well as the importance of community ambassadors. And that's really in regards to kind of any population group in a community, is making sure that someone who looks, talks, has the same experiences as them are the representatives who are speaking to them and making sure that their voices are heard. So thank you so much for sharing the great work that's happening there in Miami Lakes.
Well, thank you for asking me.
And now we do have a couple of questions from attendees. And I think, Bob, this question is probably best answered by you, but feel free, anyone else who would like to respond, to do so. This comes from Alejandra Molina. She asks about policies, programs that have addressed the language barriers in the context of senior living centers, hospitals, caretakers, and especially affecting members of immigrant communities. And I know that you mentioned a couple of bilingual programs that are happening in Colorado. So I'm wondering if you could address that question. Yeah,
it certainly is an issue front and center here in Colorado. I mentioned earlier our ratio of Hispanic Latino population statewide, and it's much higher in other parts of the state, particularly agricultural areas like southern Colorado. I mentioned meatpacking agriculture in northeast Colorado, and also, by the way, our resort communities, where many of the workers in these world-renowned destinations are Latino. And by the way, they have to drive or take a bus an hour and a half each way to work. So yeah, bilingual approach is something that's on everyone's mind, whether you are, whether you work in a nursing home, in a congregate care facility, in a hospital. I will just say that we used pretty much the same methods on 4 efforts in 2020 and 2021. One was the census, encouraging people to sign up for the census because that means money for local communities, federal formula funding. We used it to let people know about COVID. We used bilingual strategies to let people know about the importance of voting in the November 2020 election. And then again with vaccinations. And again, multi-level strategies with radio stations, billboards, and very underrated and old-fashioned means of communication, very effective in rural parts of the country. So I don't know if that's specific enough, but I will say it's absolutely a focus of everything we do out of our office and throughout the state.
Great, thank you. All right, and now as a sort of plug here for the National Civic League, you both mentioned civic engagement as it relates to your work. And so I'm hoping that you might be able to talk more about civic engagement and provide examples of communities who are really focusing on that specific aspect of age-friendly work.
I'm sorry, who was that for?
Either you or Janine, you both mentioned civic engagement. So I'm just wondering, since that is our primary focus here at the League, if you have any examples of communities that are working on, engaging older adults really in sort of local governance decisions, that sort of thing.
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Janine.
So a couple of things. And part of it is, and so to me, it's kind of less communities, even though I know that's kind of the topic here, but it's like, how do we apply that lens to everything? When we're kind of in the same way that we would look at any group, when we're looking at decisions that have to be made, who's sitting at the table? Are all the people who need to be sitting at the table? Are we making assumptions that older people won't weigh in? And I think this has become especially troubling during the pandemic because decisions are being made, but there are myths and stereotypes that can be somewhat based on fact. But well, older people don't have access to technology, and therefore they're not going to be part of this virtual meeting where we're deciding workforce development policy. And we know that's not true, but those are the kind of assumptions that were made. So to us, what's really important, and we've been asked to do this by a number of organizations, is making sure, using methods very similar. We don't have the budget that Aarp, Colorado does, but using very similar, like how do we make sure that the word is getting out? We use social media a lot. There's a myth that older people aren't on social media. 3/4 of our following at Changing the Narrative on social media is age 65 and over, and they engage all the time. So we deliberately try to put, and we did a lot of this in our intergenerational conversation work, and I'm also looking how current senior communities could get more involved with community groups. We deliberately put older adult communities with like student groups and had intergenerational conversations about ageism, how we experience it in different parts of our life. So to me, the most important thing is being intentional and not looking at, and this goes in part as well to the prior question. I think we have a tendency to think, okay, we're going to talk about equity issues, and that's going to be about race and ethnicity. We're going to talk about older adult issues. It's here. And we fail to look at the constant intersection. I mean, we know both in terms of health and in terms of financial security, the older people who've been most severely impacted are older people of color. But we don't kind of put those together. And it struck me very much on a national level when some of the post-pandemic policy was coming out. We had aging policy that did not talk about workforce, and we had workforce policy that didn't talk about older adults. And those, and again, our philosophy of civic engagement, it's up to us. We're the leaders we're looking for, so we need to bring it to the table. And I do think, Bob, the compliments to AARP Colorado does, I think, an amazing job of doing that.
Yeah, and I would just quickly say a couple of things. Number one, civic engagement is foundational to the age-friendly community work. Even if a community doesn't choose it as one of the 8 domains they're going to focus on, they can't get the work done without civic engagement being an integral part of carrying out that work. And the second thing I'll say is there are 584 communities and states. There are 584 different models, but in my experience, the models that work best are ones that are driven by a community stakeholder group, right? And I see Kiva nodding her head. We've got examples of where a county commission or a city council passes this age-friendly community thing, and then it kind of sits on a shelf, and the new elected officials come in, and dust starts growing on the plan. It happens, right? It happens everywhere. But the communities that are the real models for age-friendly work are the ones, big and small. I mentioned Carbondale, but our most sophisticated models here are Colorado Springs and Larimer County, probably. And they are driven by deeply involved community groups.
Rebecca, can I put an example?
Yes, please do.
Recently, I was visiting a senior that's 102. And this lady is as sharp as can be. She was a realtor and sold her last property when she was 99 years old. And she was one of the original, I don't know if all you remember this, you probably don't, but she was one of the original Rosie the Riveters during World War II. And I asked her, because we went over on her birthday, and I says, is there anything that you regret? And she thought about it, and she says, yes, I'm just putting on my pantyhose and going to work. And that kind of made me think, here's somebody 102 still wants to get engaged. And I'm trying to find something I can get her engaged in to help her, because we have a few in Miami Lakes who are over 100, but she's the oldest. And we're working on trying to find something where she can feel like she belongs in accomplishing something. So I just thought that was a good example of just a senior that really wants to be involved, no matter how old they are.
Absolutely. And it kind of goes to Janine's example of, some people want to work, and we need to, provide those opportunities. Also wanted to make a quick plug. Here's my Rosie of the Riveter inspirational sign that I keep at my desk. So appreciate that example there. Okay, so I did have a little bit of a follow-up question to the engagement piece, and it's how you're reaching older adults that are a little bit more offline or even unhoused. I know that the unhoused community specifically, really with any demographic, is hard to reach. So I'm wondering what work anyone has done around that area.
I would just say that also speaks to the value of livable or age-friendly communities, because that's work that has to be done on a local level. We're governed by an executive council here at AARP Colorado, as all the state offices are. One of our executive council members, kind of our board of directors, one of our executive council members is executive director of Food Bank of the Rockies, of the Western Slope, which is Western Colorado. And she, along with our age-friendly community partners in that part of the state, certainly are very good about letting us know the challenges of the unhoused and those with food insecurity. I mentioned in my slide, letting people know, we had a great outreach effort, letting people know about rental assistance. There are some things we can do on a local level, and there are other things that frankly have to be done on a state level in terms of policy and legislative action and funding. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is with all of this, there is a lot of federal money flowing into states right now. And the question on the state and local levels, where do you allocate that money? And that's where we're trying to have a lot, we're trying to at least get engaged in the conversation to make sure money goes towards housing. And these are local community decisions too, not just state government. Goes towards housing, goes towards equitable broadband build out, right? And equitable is often defined as rural. We also define it as inner city. We want to make sure everyone has access to the internet. So again, quick answer.
Thank you for that. And then I now wanted to give one of our attendees an opportunity to unmute and ask a question. We're joined by Mark from Bellevue, Washington, who was the lead in Bellevue's 2021 All-America City application. Mark, the floor is yours.
Gosh, that seems like 3 years ago, Rebecca. I didn't have a question. I was just going to mention, as far as communication with seniors, we're a very digitally connected city and region. But during COVID, we started distributing a piece that our neighborhood news that's monthly. We started distributing that through our network on aging, Meals on Wheels, and putting small kiosks out at parks. So some of the things that, and did that a couple of times in 5 different languages for resources around COVID. But part of what we're learning, both for seniors and for other folks, that some of the very grassroots, very non-digital connections just really matter a lot. So just seeing a lot of benefit from that. And we're reaching now, I think it's about 850 folks that we really had no connection with previously through doing that hard copy distribution through our partners. So trying to learn.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark, and I appreciate your comment about trying to learn. There was someone mentioned in the chat that they're still seeing some comments that are ageist even in this webinar, and I want to address that. And you know, that's obviously we're still learning, and so my apologies if there's anything that comes off. And I think even as people who mean well, we can still get things wrong on occasion. Another question that came in here was in regards to how, so Alejandra mentioned that she is assisting her 93-year-old mother with dementia, Alzheimer's, and wondering if people could comment on how to deal with stereotyping around community members with mental health issues.
So I would just say this. So there is research that is very focused on how to deal with stereotyping and reduce stereotyping about all of us as we get older. And so a hint, I think, to all of us about ageist language, the one thing we all have in common, right, is today for each one of us, it's the oldest we've ever been. And tonight it will be the youngest, think of it before you go to sleep, youngest you'll ever be. So if we're fortunate, we're all waking up tomorrow a day older. So talking about we and us as opposed to they and them is a really useful way to get started. That's kind of number one. I haven't seen research on how to reduce stereotyping, but I would just suggest for all of us, any kind of stereotyping based on anything is wrong. We need to look at people as individuals, not as here is the group and making assumptions based on the group. So I think if we, and it's sometimes hard to remember. I mean, one of the things that we know as we get older, we actually become more different from each other as opposed to more similar. So we just, you know, we need to stop and think, are we stereotyping? Are we making assumptions? Or are we looking at people as individuals? But I'm not aware of, you know, research that's been done specifically on how to counter stereotyping among people who are living with dementia.
And I would add that virtually all of our work is done with partners, community or state partners. And one of our longstanding partners is an organization called Dementia Friendly Denver. I see Janine nodding her head, led by a very dynamic individual. And forever, back when we were doing in-person lunch and learns, and now that we're doing things virtually, her seminars, her webinars now are most popular. I mean, we get hundreds and hundreds, 600 to 1,000 people show up to listen to JJ as an expert to talk about not just how to how to love their loved ones even more, their lovies as she calls them, but also how to avoid this sort of stereotyping.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for those responses. There were also a couple of resources mentioned in the chat in regards to that question as well. We are running up on the end of our time, but I do want to fit in one parting question that I think is really good. This one comes from Susan, and she says, as an older worker, what are some strategies to respond to ageism without reporting to HR? Is it enough to signal, yes, I am capable of the tasks and activities assigned?
Bob, do you want to take that first? And I think you need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yes, the question was in regards to the workplace. As an older worker, what are strategies to respond without necessarily reporting to HR? So is it enough to signal, yes, I'm capable of the tasks and activities, or would there be other suggestions for responding to ageism in the workplace?
You know, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And I think the first step is calling it out. An older worker today is protected. And unfortunately, there are supervisors and managers that don't fully understand that. So to me, it starts with a conversation with pointing out the obvious and saying, I feel like things are not on a level playing field here. And I understand there's fear in doing that, trepidation, but you start with an open conversation, and many times a supervisor will say, well, gosh, I'm sorry, I really wasn't aware of sort of these implicit biases. I would start there.
I think we are, I guess I want to give everyone one last opportunity, Janine, Bob, Dottie, to respond to a seemingly simple question, but I think pretty complex. What does success look like? What does, however many years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, what does a more age-friendly individual community, but really United States and world look like? And how do we know we've reached success?
Well, with me, when I get a senior that will call me and say, thank you very much for recognizing me, for being there for me, and having all the different activities for us. To me, that tells me I'm in the right direction.
Yeah. And I would say this, that regardless of your age, younger or older, you have an opportunity to use your strengths and talents. No one is pushing you aside. So, and that's on an individual level, that communities are better off because they're using the insights and experience of older people very, strategically, and allowing people to be involved. That we are not using terms, we're not othering people like they're all of us, and then there's them, the older people, that it's us. And we are committed to making our community stronger, our state stronger, our country stronger, whatever it is. So that to me is kind of the vision. And then right now, my immediate vision is stop moving older people to the back of triage lines. So and strengthen age discrimination. So I've got my short term, but the long term is we're all thriving and we're not dismissed because of our age.
Yeah, not to be glib, but I would foresee a day when we have to have less and less of these conversations and webinars, right? But on, on a policy level, I was just talking about this yesterday with the CEO of a local foundation, but, I would like to see governments, state governments, for example, and federal governments along with local governments, view older adults as a valuable resource and not somehow a drain on resources, right? So we're getting there.
Yeah.
I think that is a really great way to sign us off, looking at individuals as resources and not drains. I think that's kind of the crux of it all. So thank you so much for ending us on that note. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, this was recorded. We will be sharing slides and the recording to the email address that you registered under. Thank you so much for everyone spending their time with us. A special thank you to Bob, Janine, and Dottie for sharing their expertise and experiences, and to my colleague Kiva, who helped put together today's webinar. Everyone, we will restart with our webinar series after the first of the year, so please be on the lookout for our Promising Practices series that will start back up after the first of the year. Please enjoy the rest of your day.